in this module, we're going to talk about OWASP number 2, Broken Authentication and Session Management. This vulnerability is caused by flaws in the implementation of the authentication scheme that would allow an attacker to impersonate another user, to take on that person's identity. So who would do it? Who are the threat agents? First of all, external attackers, ones that wanted to pose at someone else. Also insiders. So this is an insider threat where someone within an organization wants to pose as someone else so that the traces wouldn't be, would not go back to them, or they want to get the authority of that other person. As far as attack vectors, this is average difficulty to exploit. You need to find some kind of a flaw in the authentication scheme. The prevalence, this is very widespread. Why is it widespread? A lot of times developers try to develop their own authentication scheme. Bad idea. You don't want to roll your own authentication scheme. There are a lot out there, a lot of frameworks out there. In those frameworks, the vulnerabilities have been caught. All the different schemes that attackers go through have been caught. So you don't want to develop your own authentication scheme. As far as detectability, it's average detectability, and that's really because there are no patterns in the authentication schemes that are rolled to own. But the impact is really severe. So once an attacker takes upon the identity of another user, they can do whatever they want. They can do whatever that other attacker, the other user would have been able to do. So, lots and lots of things. So you really need to be careful about this. For example, what if you take on the identity of, an administrator? Administrators have lots of authority. So lots of things can be looked at. And so one of the ways to authenticate, the classic way that we all know and love and we deal with every day, is passwords. So a lot of our authentication schemes involve you typing in a password. And we probably are all annoyed by passwords that have to be very complex and sometimes overly complex. And so what I have on the screen here, OWASP has presented some password guidelines. These are just general good guidelines to use, number of characters, uppercase, lowercase, whatnot. So these are good guidelines. They're not over the top, crazy and complexity guidelines. So if you're going to, develop an authentication scheme, you could consider these. What's becoming more and more prominent these days is multi-factor authentication. You may hear two-factor authentication, where the multi is two. And so with this multi-factor authentication, you're getting from the user who is trying to authenticate themselves two or more of something that the person knows, like a password, something that the person is, like their fingerprint, their some kind of biometrics, iris scan, facial recognition, and something that they have, like a phone or some other device. So what you're trying to do in that case is not just use one of those, but two of those as a check and balance to make sure that the person has more than one. So once you authenticate, then you still need to be careful. So within the context of a web application, you have to watch out for the session ID. So the way authentication works in a web application is you may be working on a web application in a pre-authentication state. So you haven't done anything sensitive. You haven't tried to buy something. So you're just on the website. And then when you do want to do something that's sensitive, the website often makes you log in or somehow authenticate yourself. And at that point, the session ID that's assigned by the application would contain your credentials. And then, based upon your credentials with the session ID, you have access control. You have the authorization to perform some actions, and then eventually the session is terminated. But the session ID is something that is really, really important to take heed with. So here's an example attack. So say there was an airline reservation system, and they stored the session ID in the URL. Really, really bad idea. Here's an example of that type of a session ID with the URL. You can see the session ID is right in there. And just say the user, innocent user, says, oh, I just made a reservation to go to Washington. I want my friend to be on the same flight with me. Let me send her the URL where I bought my flight so she'll know exactly what flight I'm on. And so she sends that. And what she doesn't realize when that happens is that now her friend, hopefully a true friend that won't take advantage of her, can tape that or cut and paste that URL right into their own browser. And now they are that original user, including their credit card information. So if they wanted to, they could now buy another ticket, and the first friend would pay for the ticket. But of course, it's not always friends. An attacker may get that session ID or may say, oh, wow, look at this. If I just type some other numbers, maybe I'll get somebody else's session ID and I'll use their credit card. It could be a complete stranger. So you would never want to have a session ID so exposed like this. And so, to prevent this type of attack, first of all, you want to use only established login modules. Don't create your own. And then the second thing is balance Remember Me with security. So Remember Me functionality can be used on a website so that when you go to that website, you are already pre-authenticated. An example like Facebook often is like that. Once you log in and you indicate Remember Me, then every time you go to Facebook, you're going to already be logged in. But just say it's a banking website. You probably don't want to even provide that functionality to the user in a banking website, because that would mean that someone else just needs to use the computer that the first person had logged into on their banking site, and they could do whatever they want with the banking site. So you need to be careful of the sensitivity of the application and the ability to provide that Remember Me functionality. And then generate random session IDs. So you just saw a session ID in that prior screen, and it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What you really want to do is, for one thing, to make sure that the session ID is a random number, so that it's it would be hard to actually impersonate someone else's session. So make sure that that is the case, as well as never ever expose it in the URL. You want to have your sensitive applications log in or have the sessions, or log out, or have the sessions expire after a certain period of time of inactivity. And that time of inactivity would be proportional to the sensitivity of the data. So again, using a banking website, you might want to say if there's no activity for a minute, then you automatically log the user out. Credit card, you might want to log them out quickly. Or something else, maybe you give 5 minutes. But you do want so you want to balance the security and the usability, but you don't want to just have a session where the information is sensitive just remain open on the URL for an extended period of time, where someone could just walk up and take over that session. And you also want to use prudent password recovery mechanisms. So I'm sure plenty of times you forgot your password, and you have to click on a link that says, I forgot my password, and you hope that that scheme uses multi-factors. So rather than just you click on that to say I forgot my password, and they say what's your mother's maiden name, and then they display your password, or you authenticate, which is so easy for an attacker to do that. All you need to do is find someone's maiden name or their dog's name or whatever the question is. So you want to have it be multi-factor, where if you do forget your password, then it automatically goes to a email address that's on file, not one that you can specify. So you just want to make sure that when you do recover passwords, that you can be much more assured that it actually is the original user. Just a little comic to finish us off. The beloved pet and Oliver, though you are no longer with us, know that you will always be in our memories and our passwords. And that is so true. We often use our dogs and cats' names in the passwords.